Imagine for a moment that you're a lighthouse keeper, a role that you specifically selected, a role that has purpose and meaning for you. You treasure this job and you take it seriously. And today, a very large storm is brewing. You've been keeping this lighthouse for 11 years. And in all that time, there's only been one thing that reliably tells you a storm is coming before the barometer does. It's a smell, not the smell of rain. That comes later, when the first clouds arrive and the humidity builds. This is earlier than that, sometimes hours earlier. A particular sharpness in the air, something almost metallic, but not quite. Something that has nothing to do with rain and everything to do with pressure, though you couldn't explain the connection if someone asked. You just know it. You stepped outside this morning and it was there, faint but definite, and you've been preparing ever since. The first indication was the smell, but the second was something you noticed while making breakfast. The way the light came through the eastward window was slightly different than usual, flatter somehow, as if there was a film between the sun and the glass, even though the glass was clean. You stood at the window with your coffee and looked at the sky, and it took you a moment to identify what was wrong. The sky above was clear, but at the edge of the southeast horizon, something was building. You've been doing this job long enough to know what that particular edging of cloud means. The relief keeper mentioned it before he left. He stood at the door with his coat on and his bag in his hand and looked southeast and said, "There's weather coming." And you said yes. And he said, "Bad one." You said, "Probably." "Good luck," he replied, and you thanked him. He walked down the path to the landing, and you watched the supply boat take him away. Then you were alone on the headland, which is where you live, which is where you've chosen to live. This is the specific quality of the life here that you've thought about often and never quite been able to explain to people who haven't lived it. The aloneness is not loneliness. It's a different thing entirely. Loneliness is the pain of connection withheld. What you feel here when the supply boat is gone and the headland is just you and the tower and the sea is something closer to the opposite, a fullness of presence, a sense of being exactly where you are without distraction. The weather is real, the light is real, your work is real. Nothing here is abstract. The headland has its own daily rhythms that have nothing to do with the light or the weather. The rabbits that live in the grass below the tower come out at dusk and dawn, and you've watched them long enough to know which burrow belongs to which family. The pair of ravens that nest in the rocks on the eastern face have been there since your second year, and you've watched them raise chicks every spring, the same pair, returning to the same nest, building on the same foundation. The seals that haul out on the flat rocks at the base of the headland at low tide are not the same individuals every day, but they're the same species behaving in the same way. And watching them has taught you things about the tides that no chart could have taught you as directly. You are not alone here in any biological sense. You're just the only human, which is a different thing. The mornings before weather are different from ordinary mornings. Ordinary mornings have a looseness to them. You can take your coffee wherever you want, read for an hour, walk the headland before starting the daily maintenance. Storm mornings are tighter. The list is there before you finished breakfast, already organising your day into its sequence of tasks, and you move through it with a deliberateness that feels different from your ordinary pace. Not rushed, just purposeful in a way that ordinary days don't require. The life of a lighthouse keeper is not something most people choose without thinking about it first, and you thought about it carefully. You'd worked at sea before this posting, years on coastal vessels, and you'd decided that you wanted to be near the sea without being on it. On a ship, you're part of the sea's movement. You go where it goes, when it goes there. Here on the headland, you're adjacent to it, close enough to hear it, to smell it, to watch it change through every mood and season, but standing still while it moves. Over 11 years you've accumulated that knowledge, and it has settled into you gradually, the way salt settles into wood, until you don't quite know anymore where the knowledge ends and you begin. The lighthouse stands on a headland at the eastern edge of Nova Scotia, where the land runs out into the North Atlantic in a series of ragged rocks that have been ending ships since long before there was a light here to warn them. The tower is stone, 60 feet tall, with walls thick enough that in a full storm you can barely feel the wind inside. The keeper's house is attached to the base, a small dwelling that's cold in winter and damp in autumn, and sometimes, in the brief summers, almost pleasant. The headland is a specific piece of ground that you know the way you'd know a room you lived in for a long time. Every stone of the path, the particular way the wind wraps around the north side of the tower. The exact view from each window at different times of day and in different weather. You walk the same ground every day, and it's never the same ground twice, because the light is always different, and the sea is always different, and you are always slightly different. The barometer in the hallway confirmed what your nose told you this morning. It's been falling since before breakfast. Steadily, without hesitation, the needle tracking down in that purposeful way that means a real storm and not just a blow. By noon, the barometer and the sky were saying the same thing. The preparation has its own rhythm. Each task leads naturally to the next. Checking the oil supply reminds you to check the wicks. Checking the wicks reminds you to check the mechanism. Checking the mechanism reminds you to check the fog signal. The sequence was taught to you by the keeper who trained you, a man who had kept lights on 3 different headlands over 40 years and who had reduced the preparation for a storm to a series of movements so practiced and so efficient that watching him do it was like watching a craftsman at a familiar bench. You don't have his elegance, you're still conscious of the steps in a way he wasn't, but you have his thoroughness, which is the part that matters. The fog signal is a steam-powered horn that sits in a small outbuilding attached to the tower, and maintaining it is one of the less pleasant aspects of the job. The mechanism is old and cantankerous and requires a specific sequence of warming and priming before it will produce the deep bass note that's supposed to carry several miles in thick weather. You test it this afternoon and it responds after the usual complaints, a sound so deep and so loud that it vibrates in your chest cavity and startles the rabbits from their grazing on the slope below. You won't need it unless the fog comes in ahead of the storm, which it sometimes does and sometimes doesn't. Better to have it ready. You've been working through the preparation since mid-morning. Not a written list. You stopped needing to write it down years ago, but a sequence you move through in order. The oil in the lamp room checked and topped off. The spare wicks located and set out on the bench. The clockwork mechanism that rotates the lens wound and tested. The fog signal checked. The storeroom confirmed. Enough provisions for 4 days past your rotation date. The door hinges oiled. The shutters on the seaward windows latched from the inside. The lamp room is your domain in a specific way the rest of the lighthouse isn't. The house is yours in the way a person's house is theirs. But the lamp room is yours differently. It's the reason you're here. The lens is a beautiful object, a Fresnel lens, built in France 30 years ago and shipped across the ocean to this headland, and the precision of it, the way the individual prisms are ground and arranged so that a relatively small light source is focused into a beam that carries for miles, is a kind of engineering you have genuine respect for. You clean it carefully and maintain it carefully. It deserves that. The physical preparation is one kind of readiness. The other kind doesn't appear on any list. It's more like a settling of the mind, a decision made early and kept, not to spend energy on things you can't affect. You can't affect the storm. You can't affect the ships out there. What you can do is maintain this light. Everything else is outside your hands. It's late afternoon now, and the wind has arrived. Not the full storm wind yet, that's still hours away, but the advance of it. Warmer than the usual wind on this coast. There's something in warm air coming off the ocean before a major system that doesn't sit right. You felt it before, and you know what follows it. You stand at the seaward window and look at the water. The sea has been building since morning. The swells are longer now, the period between them stretched by the distant energy of the storm, and they roll under the grey sky with a kind of unhurried power. They're carrying energy accumulated over hundreds of miles of open Atlantic. And when that energy reaches the rocks below the headland, the impact registers in your chest as much as in your ears. There's a particular activity that takes up the daylight hours before a bad storm, and that's watching the ships. This stretch of coast is a working lane, traffic going in and out of Halifax, fishing boats working the grounds to the east, coastal traders. On a normal day, you register these ships as features of the environment. Before a storm, you watch them differently. What you're looking for is the ones who haven't seen what you've seen. A steamer appeared on the horizon an hour ago, heading north, and she was well handled. The crew clearly aware of what was coming, having taken a slightly more northerly track for sea room. Somebody on that bridge was reading the same signs you were reading. You felt a kind of kinship watching it. The fishing boats from the harbour 2 miles along the coast mostly came in by early afternoon. You could see them from the headland, one after another, through the late morning, which told you the fishermen had made the same decision you'd made. The sea empties out before a bad storm in a way that's visible from high ground, a gradual removal of small craft from the water. By the time you lit the lamp, there was nothing moving in the visible water. You light the lamp at the usual time. The wick catches, the flame grows. The lens assembly is already turning, the clockwork running smoothly, and the beam begins its rotation, sweeping out across the water every few seconds. You've stood in this room at the moment of lighting hundreds of times, and it never entirely loses its quality. This deliberate act of putting a light in the dark, of saying, here is the shore, here is where the land is. You check the mechanism before you go down. You put your hand on the housing and feel it running, the slight vibration of the clockwork, steady and even. It's been reliable for as long as you've kept this light. You're not expecting trouble, but you check anyway. You always check. The waiting is the hardest part, and it's not hard in the way people who haven't experienced it might expect. It's not anxious waiting. You know what's coming, and you're prepared for it. It's more like the particular patience of standing in a queue when you know the queue is going to be a long one. There's nothing to do about the length, so you settle into it. You make another cup of coffee. You stand at the window. You watch the sea build. The clouds to the southeast are thicker now, lower, the green-grey colour deepening as the system approaches. The light has gone flat. The shadows have disappeared from the landscape because there's no direct sun to cast them, and everything looks slightly unreal in this even, diffuse light, as if the world has been photographed through a filter that removes all contrast. A cormorant passes the headland, flying low, heading for the sheltered water on the western side of the point. It knows. They all know. The birds have been reading the weather all day, and by this point in the afternoon, the headland is empty of everything except you and the gulls, which never seem to leave, and the wind, which is doing more and more of the talking. The wind is building. You can hear it in the tower now, in the seams around the door frames, in the joints where the stone sections meet. At low speeds, it's a whistle, almost like a signal. As it builds, it deepens into a moan you can feel as much as hear. You put your hand flat on the wall and feel the storm through the masonry. You eat early before the storm gets serious. You sit at the small table and eat a simple meal and listen to the wind working itself up outside. Through the window, you can see the trees at the edge of the garden, such as it is, and their movement tells you what the anemometer confirms. It'll be a real one tonight. You wash the dishes and put them away. You dry the table. You check that the stove is drawing properly. In a strong wind, the draft can reverse and fill the kitchen with smoke, which happened once in your first winter and taught you a lesson about chimney management that you haven't needed to relearn. You make sure everything loose in the kitchen is secured, not because you expect the building to move enough to shift things off surfaces, but because it's part of the sequence, and the sequence exists for a reason. Order is how you don't miss things. You go up to the lamp room one more time before the storm arrives properly. The beam is turning, the mechanism is running, the oil is adequate. You stand at the window and look out. The last light of the day has gone, and the beam is the only light there is. It sweeps past the glass every few seconds, reaching out into the dark and the beginning rain, and each time it passes, you can see a little less of the sea and the land beyond, as if the storm is narrowing your world deliberately, drawing the boundaries tighter with each pass of the light. This is the hour you've always found the most particular, the hour when the storm is clearly arriving but hasn't yet fully committed, when the wind is building but hasn't peaked, when the rain is starting but hasn't yet become the sustained downpour it will become by midnight. It's an hour of approach, of things getting closer, of the headland bracing itself in the way a person braces when they know something is coming but don't yet know how hard it's going to hit. You brace with it. You settle your weight. You let the building hold you the way it's going to hold you all night. The first rain arrives around 9. Not the heavy, driven rain of the full storm, just the vanguard, light and tentative, tapping at the glass. Through the lamp room windows, you watch the beam passing through it, the light briefly made visible as it moves through the drops. Beautiful is the word people would use. It's not quite right. It's more specific than that. The light doing its job in conditions that make the job harder. By 10, the storm is fully here. The rain is horizontal. Your world has narrowed to the tower. This is what happens in a serious storm. The rest of the world stops being accessible. The ships that are out there are out there. You can keep the light turning. That's the whole of what's available to you, and you've made your peace with that. The night interior of the lighthouse during a storm is a world of its own. The stone walls conduct the sound into the building, and you can hear the wind working on every surface. The tower moves slightly in a very bad blow, the stone flexing in a way you can feel in your feet but can't see with your eyes. The first time you felt it, you were alarmed. Now you understand it. A structure that can't flex will break instead. You're not frightened. You were. The first bad storm here. By the third, you'd learned what the building is capable of and what you yourself are capable of. And since then, the feeling has been something else. A concentrated attentiveness, a simplifying of the world to what actually matters. The mechanism turning, the lamp burning. Those two things are your world tonight. The storm finds the lighthouse's weaknesses the way water finds the cracks in a wall. There's a window on the north face of the tower, 2 floors below the lamp room, that has never sat quite right in its frame, and in a strong northerly component it lets in a whistle that's audible from the kitchen. There's a place where the roof line of the keeper's house meets the base of the tower, where water gets in if the wind is driving rain from the southeast at a particular angle. You know these weaknesses. You've patched them, caulked them, reported them to the service. Some of them have been fixed. Some of them are part of the building's character now, the small imperfections you live with, because perfection in a stone building on an Atlantic headland is not a realistic expectation. By midnight, the wind is as strong as it's going to get. You can tell not because it reaches an obvious peak, but by its quality, a kind of steadiness in the extreme, the way a very loud sound eventually becomes a kind of silence because your hearing adapts to it. The gusts have merged into a continuous roar. The rain is solid. The building is doing what it was built to do, which is stand still while everything around it moves. You go up to the lamp room and check. Running smooth, oil level adequate, wick clean and burning well. You put your hand on the housing and feel it turning, and you stand there for a moment in the noise of the storm and the steady light of the lamp. You've thought, on other storm nights, about what this light means to a ship out there, not abstractly, specifically. You've been on the water in conditions approaching this, and you know that the beam appearing through the weather, regular and predictable, arriving at the interval you expected, means something that's not easily reduced to the functional. It means someone is there. It means the land is exactly where the charts say it is. It means the world is organized the way it's supposed to be, which is not a small thing to know when everything outside is trying to suggest otherwise. There's a particular quality to staying awake when everyone and everything else seems to be asleep. The fishermen in the harbour are in their beds. The families along the coast are in their beds. Only you are awake and deliberate, and the light turning in the lamp room, and the clockwork that turns it. 3 points of wakefulness in a sleeping world. You make tea around midnight, not because you're particularly thirsty, but because making tea is an ordinary thing to do, a few minutes of small familiar actions inside the extraordinary. The kettle on the stove, the water heating, the smell of it, mixing with the smell of lamp oil and the stone walls that have absorbed decades of weather. You carry the cup up to the lamp room and you drink it, and the storm roars outside, and the light keeps going. You've kept lights through worse than this. The storm 2 winters ago was the worst you've experienced here. Winds that the anemometer measured at over 80 knots before the anemometer stopped working. Seas that threw spray over the top of the tower for the first and only time in your tenure. You sat in the lamp room through that one with your hands on the mechanism housing, and you felt the tower move in a way that was different from the usual flex, a deeper oscillation that you could feel in your stomach. The mechanism didn't falter, the light didn't go out, you didn't leave the lamp room for 6 hours. When the dawn came, the headland looked like a different place. The path was washed out, the garden was gone, the outbuilding had lost a section of roof. But the tower stood. The light had kept turning. You wrote the logbook entry with hands that were perfectly steady because they had been doing what they were supposed to be doing all night. The logbook is on the small desk in the lamp room. You write in it at the end of each watch, conditions, events, any vessels observed. Tonight, the entry will be longer than most. You keep these records carefully. The accumulated data of weather and sea conditions on this coast feeds into the slowly improving science of Atlantic weather prediction. Your individual observations become part of something larger, which is a satisfying thought to hold in the small hours of a storm night. The sea beyond the glass is invisible. The rain and dark combine to make a complete opacity, but you can hear it. Even in the lamp room, even with everything the wind is doing, you can hear the sea on the rocks below. You've been hearing it for 11 years. You know the difference between its ordinary sound, steady and businesslike, and the sound it makes when a storm has built it to this height. A percussion, a series of impacts, the sound of force, meeting resistance over and over without resolution. It's been doing this since before the Lighthouse was here. It'll be doing it long after. The hours between 3 and 5 in the morning are the longest hours. The storm's peak has passed, but the darkness still has hours to run. The wind has dropped to something manageable, 40 knots rather than 60. But manageable and pleasant are different things. You make another round of checks. Not because you're anxious, the mechanism has been flawless all night, but because checking is the work, and the work is what you do in these hours. Each check adds a few minutes of purposeful movement to the hours of waiting, and purposeful movement is its own kind of comfort. You sit in the chair in the lamp room and watch the mechanism turn. The light sweeps past you every few seconds, your shadow jumping and settling, the room cycling between bright and dim. Not quite thought, not quite rest. Alert enough to catch anything that needs catching, still enough to let the hours pass. Somewhere past 2, the wind begins to ease, not dramatically. There's no single moment when you can say it turned. But over the course of half an hour, the sound changes. The gusts are still strong when they come, but there's space between them now. The rain eases too. By 3, the storm is clearly past its peak. By 4, the barometer has stopped falling and is sitting still, gathering itself before the slow climb back. The sky in the east begins to lighten around 5. Not sunrise, the sun's still below the horizon, but the darkness becomes less total, navy rather than black. And you can make out the line where the sea meets the sky, which was invisible all night. You extinguish the lamp at first light. The wick trimmed and covered, the lens assembly slowed and stopped, the lamp room settling into the quiet of a machine at rest. Tonight, it feels earned. You go outside. The air is extraordinary. After a night of storm, the air on this headland has a quality you've tried to find words for many times. Clean doesn't cover it. The storm has moved through every cubic foot of air in this part of the world, turned it over, and worked it. And what's left feels alive. You breathe it, and your body responds the way it responds to good news. Your shoulders drop. Your face turns upward. The sea is still running high, the long swells still rolling in, even though the wind that drove them is gone. They catch the early light, pink at the eastern edge now, and the roughness and the colour together make something you'd call beautiful, if beautiful wasn't such a tired word for it. The water catching the light differently on each face of each wave, never the same twice. The birds are already out, gulls working the new tide at the base of the rocks below, their calls carrying up to you on the still air. They're always there within minutes of the weather passing, working the exposed rocks with efficient purposefulness. You stand on the headland for a long time. There's nowhere to be. Your relief comes this afternoon, and until then, the morning is yours. The aftermath is yours. The clouds are breaking up to the southeast, the blue showing through in widening patches, the light improving by the minute. By midday it'll probably be clear, the air washed and sharp, the sea still heavy but going down. The light kept turning all night. The dawn has come. You're here. You breathe the clean, extraordinary air, and you watch the sea come back to itself, and you let the morning be exactly what it is. Ordinary, extraordinary, enough. Your eyes close briefly against the brightness. The wind, what's left of it, moves past your face. Below you, the sea keeps rolling in, steady and patient, the way it always is. The way it always will be. The rocks have taken worse storms than this one. The light has stood through worse, and so have you. The morning after a storm on this headland is one of the specific pleasures of this life, and you've learned to take it fully, to not rush through it toward whatever comes next. The next thing is the logbook entry, and after that, the inspection of the building and the grounds for damage, and after that, the preparation for the relief keeper's arrival, and all of those things will happen in their time. But this, standing here in the washed air, watching the sea settle, feeling the particular stillness that follows the particular noise of a bad night, this belongs to you, and you take it. The rocks below the headland are dark with the water, and there are pools in them that weren't there yesterday, pools that the storm has carved or widened or filled with debris from the deep. The seaweed on the lower rocks has been rearranged, laid in new patterns by the waves, and the smell of it is strong in the clean air. The particular iodine and salt smell of disturbed marine vegetation that you associate with post-storm mornings and with nothing else. The tide is going out. The exposed rock is wet and shining. Life is resuming its business down there. The limpets and the barnacles and the small crabs that hide in the weed are going back to what they do when the water retreats, which is what they've been doing on these rocks since long before the lighthouse was here, since long before anyone thought to put a light on this headland, since long before the concept of warning or safety or keeping watch had occurred to any human mind. You think about the ships that were out there last night. You don't know if the light helped anyone. You rarely know. That's one of the specific qualities of this work. You do it without feedback, without confirmation, without ever knowing whether the thing you're maintaining is being used or seen or needed on any given night. You maintain it anyway. You maintain it because that's the agreement, the unspoken contract between the keeper and the sea, which is that the light will be on when it needs to be on, regardless of whether anyone is watching, regardless of whether the night is calm or catastrophic, regardless of how tired you are or how much you'd rather be in bed. You maintain it because the alternative to maintaining it is unacceptable, and because the maintenance is the work, and the work is what you chose, and you choose it again. There's nothing left to do. The morning holds you, gentle and clean, and full of the light that follows a storm. You let it. Thank you for listening.